In this episode, we're going to look at creating a wizard from scratch, and we're going to take a look at it from a normal perspective, but then also adding in Hotwire to make it work with that as well. So if we go to create a new company, we have two attributes, a name and a website. We can create the company, however, we'll get some errors that the name cannot be blank and the website cannot be blank. So once we fill out the form, we can continue on, and then we can enter in a location. And similar to the company, when we go to create the company location, it also does validation. And in this case, a location belongs to a company, and a company has one location. Once we fill this out, we can create the company location, and now at this point, all the validations have passed, and now we have created the company record along with the association of the location. And so to get started in our terminal, we'll go ahead and generate a model, and we'll just call this our company, and we'll have our two attributes, the name and the website. We can then generate another model, and this is going to be for our location. We'll have a company belongs to association. So this will create the proper indexes as well as a company underscore ID integer. And then we can create some additional attributes. Just to keep it simple, we'll just have a street address, a city, a state, and a zip. Once that's done, we can go ahead and run Rails DB migrate to migrate our database. And then within the company model, we do have to build in the association to our location, and we're just going to do a has1 location. And typically when we handle validations, we would put these in our company model. However, I'm going to leave them out in this case, and typically it would be something like a validates, the name, and then something like a presence is set to true. However, I'm going to comment this out because what we'll find when we are creating our wizard is that we're going to have a separate section for the validations. And it's going to be something where we are mocking what a company looks like, and then we need to temporarily store this information because it's all part of one whole wizard. But in practice, you would want to put the validations within your model, like we see here, as any kind of record updates to a company or location would need to go through those proper validations. And next, I'm going to go into the routes.rb file because I want to start planning out how this is going to look. So one thing that's going to be a bit complicated is as we are going through each one of these steps, we want to create some kind of separation just so our code is clean and maintainable. And as you go into different controllers or views, you know that you are working within a wizard. So I have a namespace, and I'll just call this the wizards. And then within this block, I might have several different wizards. So I want to create another namespace, and I'm just going to call this the company's namespace. And then within here, I can create the different resources or the links to the controllers that we'll need. So the first one, because we're already talking about the context of our company, the information that we really want to gather here is the profile information for that company. And we won't need the full CRUD routing, so I'm only going to include what we need. And this is going to be the new action and the create action. We then can have another resource for our locations. And so because we are under the namespace wizards and the namespace companies, I know that this locations resource is in reference to the company wizard. And again, we would only need the new and the create action. We could add as many other resources as we want here, and as our business requirements would require to build out a full-fledged wizard. However, in this particular case, if I'm completed and we only needed these two different steps, then we could have a resources and then have some kind of ending, or I'm just going to call this finished. We'll only need the show action. So this finished resource is basically going to say that we have completed the wizard and here are your results. And so before we had talked about the validations needing to be within the company and our location models. However, if we did have some other kind of information that we are gathering about a particular company or a location, and we were going to work with that data, manipulate it, transform it into the proper formats that we need for the company and the location, then we are able to create a separate folder and a separate model, which isn't really attached to a database record, but instead it's going to be in reference to just this wizard. So I'm going to create a folder called wizards within my models folder, and within here I'm going to create a file, and I'm just going to call this the company_profile.rb. So we can create our module wizards. It's going to be a class of the company profile. And so even though we are not dealing with an active record object, we could include the active model : model. And this will allow this object to be treated similar to an active record model, where we get validations and all of the other benefits of an active record object. So we can create an attr accessor for our name and the website. We could do a validates the name, and we want to make sure that the presence is set to true. And then we can also do another validation for the website. And so it's up to you how you want to do this, but typically, if I am creating a wizard and all of the attributes and requirements that I need for a particular model is going to be the exact same, then I would just have these validations within the actual model. However, I could have a DBA field, which is a doing business as, within this wizard of the company profile, and then have another attr accessor for this DBA. And then I could do some kind of manipulation where I include the name, and then in parentheses include a DBA, and then whatever field that the user enters in here, and store that as the company name. So in that particular case, I would probably extract the validation logic out of the company model and place it within this wizard's company profile. Of course, we would still have the proper validations within the company model. However, within this wizard company profile, we have additional things that's going to be specific to this wizard and not really carried out or used throughout the application or elsewhere. But for now, it is a little bit redundant because we are only going to track the attributes for the company profile, and it matches up with what the company model uses. And so I'm going to go ahead and create another wizard for our company_location.rb, and I'm just going to paste in what we had for the company profile and just change the text. So we have a location profile, and then we have a street address, a city, state, and also a zip code. And so we can copy this down into the necessary validations for this particular model. And so now that we have the routes and we have a mock of what our wizard will need for the company profile and the location, we can go ahead and start creating the controllers. So we will need a new folder. We'll call it wizards because that's what we had set in the namespace of our routes. And within the wizards folder, we'll create a companies folder. Within here, we could create our profiles _controller.rb. And again, this is all following the namespacing and the resources that we created in the routes. And just for our reference here, because this is going to get sorted alphabetically instead of any kind of steps in our process, I'm just going to put a step 1 within here. We then have our module for the wizards, another module for the companies, and then we'll have our class for the profiles controller, and we'll still inherit from the application controller. We do have 2 actions. We have a new and then a create action. Within the new action, I'm going to just set an instance variable for our company_profile is equal to the company profile.new. And before we go further with the create actions content, I want to go ahead and build out the action view for this company profile. So in the views folder, we'll create a new folder called the wizards. And within here, again, we'll have another folder called companies. Because I am working with the profiles controller, we'll need a folder called profiles. And then we can have our new.html.erb view. And within here, we're going to start out with a form. So we'll have a form with the model is going to be the instance variable that we set in the new action, and that is the company_profile. And then we need to pass in a URL. And this URL is going to be to the create action of the profiles controller. So that path is going to be the wizards underscore companies underscore profiles underscore path. And in the terminal, we could do a Rails route with a pipe, and we can grep the wizard to see all the different paths that we have for the wizard. And for our post action, there is the wizards companies profiles path, and that does go to the profiles create action. And because this company profile is inheriting from the active model, we can check if there are any validation errors. So we can have a company underscore profile dot errors dot any, and if there are some errors, then we can just display out those errors. So we'll just have a div with an unordered list. We'll list through each one of those errors and then just display the full message. We then have a div class. Now just put in some styling, and then we can have a form label for the name, then also a form.text field for the name. And again, I'm just going to add a class for some styling. And we could just copy this out. Again, except for the name, we'll have for the website. And at the end, we just need to call the form submit to continue on. And we just may want to call this continue. And we could also add some styling. And so now visiting the wizards companies profiles new URI, we can see that we can enter in a name and then also a website, and we can continue on. However, it's not going to do anything because we don't have anything in our create action yet. So in the create action, I'm going to have the company underscore profile is equal to the company profile new, and then we'll create a private method for the company profile params. And within here, we'll just take in our params.require the wizards company profile. And if we look at our logs where we had tried making the post, we can see where it went to our profiles controller create action. The params came in under the wizards company profile, and then we have our name and the website. And then we can permit the name and the website. And next is the tricky part, and this is essentially what makes this wizard possible. So we can check if the company profile is valid. So typically here in a create action, you would check if the company profile.save, and if that returned true, then you would redirect the user, otherwise you would perform some other kind of action. But in our case, we're not wanting to create the company record yet because we're in a process. We're going through a wizard and we don't want to persist anything until we have completed the wizard entirely. So we're just checking if the record is valid, meaning that it's passed all the validation checks. And if it is valid, then we need to persist this information somehow so that when we come back and complete the wizard, then we are able to then create the company record as well as the location. So in this case, I'm just going to store it in the session. So we'll have a company profile, and we'll just set this to a hash, and we'll have a name, and we can get our company profile.name, and we'll set the website equal to the company profile.website. So later when we actually go to create the company profile, we could just pass in the session to get the parameters that we need. And so now that we have a valid company profile, meaning that all the parameters needed to create the company record are valid, and we've stored the session data so we can access this information later, we can now redirect to the new wizards, companies, and then the location path, which is the next step in our process. Otherwise, if the information provided for the company profile was not valid, then we could just call render new, and we can close out our if statement. So now if we come back, and if we try to continue on, we'll get the validation errors, that the name cannot be blank, and the website cannot be blank. And if we fill out one of those and continue on, we get the website cannot be blank, so the validation is working appropriately. If we continue on, we will get an error as we would expect because we haven't defined the locations controller yet. So under the controllers wizards companies folder, we'll create the locations underscore controller.rb. I'll just put a step 2 in the comment, and we'll have a module for our wizards, module for the companies, and then we'll have the class locations controller, inheriting from the application controller. Again, we'll have a new action, and we'll have a create action. In the new action, we'll create an instance variable for the company location, and we'll set this equal to the company location.new. And one thing that we can do here, and we could also do this for the company profiles, but I'll just show this example here if it's something that you're interested in, is a situation where maybe someone wants to come back using the same browser at a different point in time while their session is still valid. And so when we create the new instance, we can just pass in the session data for the company underscore location. And this is something where if the session company location data is already stored, then it's going to automatically fill out that information. So we could do something similar on the company profile, where when we create the new instance, we can just pass in the session company profile. And essentially what that would look like beforehand is if we come in here, if we create a test company, and also if we create a website, and we continue on, we get an error. But if we come back to the company profiles in the new action, you see that we lost our information. Because we already have that stored, if we just pass in that session data into the new instance of the company profile, when we come back and refresh, the information will have persisted. And so that's probably not a bad idea to do. And keep in mind that that information will only persist as long as the session is valid. And so back in the locations controller, we have our new action. And again, before we build out our create action, I'm going to go ahead and build out the view for the company locations new action. And that file will exist under our views, wizards, companies, the locations folder, and then the new.html.erb, where again, we'll have a form with the model, and this time it is the company underscore location, again, what we set in the new action of the locations controller, and we want to pass it to the URL of the wizards, and instead of the profiles path, it's actually going to be the locations path. And then everything else here is going to be pretty much standard. So I'm just going to paste it in, where we are just checking if there's any errors on the company location. If there are, then we'll just display the error messages, and then we'll just have a div for each one of our text inputs. And for the location, that's going to be our street address, city, state, and zip. And then we have a form submit button to continue on with some added styling. Except in this case, because this is our last step, instead of continue, we may want to say create company. So then in the locations controller create action, we can set our company location is equal to the company location. We'll create a new instance, and again, we'll create a company location params, which is going to be a private method where we are just requiring that the wizard's company location is present, and then we can permit the street address, the city, state, and zip. And I'm just going to create another private method. We'll just call this the set session data. And this is simply just going to take our session and then the company underscore location. We're going to create a hash from this where the street address is equal to the company location dot street address. And then we'll do the same for the city, state, and zip. So we have our city, we have the state, and then we have our zip code. And so this set session data, very similar to what we did on the profiles controller, we would want to set this after if the @company location is valid. If it is valid, then that means it has passed all the validation requirements, but it really is up to you whether or not you want to set the session data before or after the company location validation check. Because if you set it afterwards, then you are basically requiring all the information to be valid in order to store that session data, which means that if the user refreshes the page, then they're going to lose whatever they've inputted. So you may want to set it beforehand. And so because this is the last step, this is where things are going to get a little bit tricky. If the company location was not valid, then we can simply just render new. However, if the company location was valid, then we now have all the information that we need to save for the company as well as the location, We could build it in here, however, that's going to get to be pretty long, and I really just want to move this off into a different class. So I'm just going to have a new company creation, and we'll call this, and we're going to pass in our session data. We could just pass in the session data for the company location and the company profile. That way we are only working with and dealing with the information that we need. But just for this example, and just because it's a bit easier, I'm just going to pass the entire session into this company creation. And so you may want to put this into some kind of service object or something similar. However, I'm just going to put in the models folder, and it's going to be the new company creation.rb, and we'll have the class new company creation. We'll have a self.call where we take in the session. We'll then create a new instance of the object, passing in the session, and then we'll have an instance method called call. So we'll have our initialize, where we're taking in our session. We'll set the instance variable session is equal to session, and then we'll have our call method. For the call, we'll just have a company. We'll set this equal to the company.new, and then we need some kind of company params. I'm just going to make this a private method where we just return the session, and then we can get our company underscore profile. And while I'm down here in the private method, I'm going to go ahead and create one for the location params, and that's going to get our session and the company underscore location. So now that we are creating a new instance of our company, and now that we have a new instance of our company, we can call the build underscore location, and this will create a new instance of the location, associating it to the company. And we could just pass in the location underscore params. And for this call method, we're not actually going to persist anything. We're just creating the new instance of the company and the location, and we're just going to return the company. So then in the locations controller, we can just set this equal to the company, and then we can do a check if the company.save. Then we can redirect to the wizards companies underscore finished path. And if you remember, this finished path is a show action, which is going to expect an ID, and I'm just going to pass in the company so we can look up the company there and then display the summary. However, I wouldn't say that we're done yet, because we do want to handle that session data that we temporarily stored, and we can call session.delete and then the company profile. So that way we're not persisting that within our session. We can do the same for the company location. So now we can test this out with our company profile's new path, and then we can test a validation where when we try to create the company, we get our validation errors. If we fill out this information and create the company, we then get the uninitialized constant for the finished controller, and that's expected because we haven't created it yet. However, if we look at the logs for the post for the locations controller create action, you can see that we have a transaction where we've created the company and we've also created the location. So let's go ahead and finish this up with the finished controller.rb that we'll create under the wizards and the companies. So again, we're just going to have a module for the wizards, module for the companies, we'll have our finished controller, and then we'll have our show action. We can set the company is equal to the company.find the params ID, since that's what's getting passed in from the locations controller. Then down in our views, under the companies, we can create a finished folder with a show.html.erb, and I'm just going to paste in where we can just display the company name, website, and the location. So if we refresh the page, so then we can see our company name, the website, and the address for that location. And back on the welcome index, let's just add in a table where we can see all of the companies. But then also let's create a link to where we can create a new company. So we'll have a link to the new company, and that's going to go to the new wizards companies profile path. And then I'll just add a class to make it a button. So now if we come back and refresh, we have our new company button, and then we can see the existing company that we've already created. So we'll just create a test company 2 and we'll just fill out all the information. When we create the company, we can see the finished show page, and if we come back, we then have the company and location created. And so we've not written any JavaScript for this, and everything that we've done has been pretty much pure Ruby and Ruby on Rails. And we really could stop there. However, if we did want to add Hotwire, then that's going to be as simple as just doing a bundle add hotwire-rails and running the bin rails hotwire :install. And now that we have Hotwire installed, we can come into each one of our views. So I'll start with the profiles new page, and then we can have a turbo frame tag. And the trick here is going to be giving it a consistent name. So I'm just going to call this the wizard for the company. I'll copy this because we are going to need to use this again, and I'll close out the block. So because we have this wizard company turbo frame tag on the locations, we're also going to have the same thing. So I'll paste this into our locations, and we're also going to have it for the finished page. And that's all you have to do. Because we've already designed our application to work without Hotwire, adding in Hotwire to something like this is going to be fairly simple. We didn't overcomplicate the implementation of our wizard more than we had to. So restarting our Rails application, coming back and refreshing now, we can now create a new company. We'll call this Test Company 3, and we'll just fill out this information. And again, if we try to create the company, all the validations still work as we would expect because it's all encapsulated in the turbo frame tag. But we can fill out this information, create the company, and then it takes us to the finished show page, as well as deleting the information from the session. If we go back to the home, we now have our Test Company 3. And this is where having turbo is going to be pretty helpful because as we fill in this information and we continue on to our location, if we forgot to add in some of the state and the zip and we go to create our company, we get the validation errors, but because we are still on the company's profile new page, thanks to Turbo, and if we were to refresh, it takes us back to the company profile's new page, and we still have that information persisted, and if we continue on, we still have everything that we need, and basically where we had left off. And so again, we could just demo this with entering in a different zip code, creating it, we get our validation error. If we come home and then go to create a new company, we still have that session data. And continuing on, we then still have our location data. If we fill in our state and create the company and come back home, then we have our new record. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks for watching.